Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. A rain of fire descended onto the Bai clan, illuminating everything with bright red light. The clan was immediately thrown into a huge commotion, and power was poured into the spell formation to defend against the incoming flame. Countless clan members rushed out of their residences to look up into the sky, whereupon astonished shouts began to fill the night sky. What is that? Don't tell me we're under attack. It's a rain of fire. The heat from the fire was almost at the level of 12-colored flame, causing rumbling sounds to echo out as the clan's defensive spell formation twisted and distorted. One by one, powerful clan members flew up into the air. What happened? Bai Qi was there in the crowd, looking shocked, as was Madame Kai, who had emerged from her mansion to see what was happening. 12-colored flame. That's 12-colored flame. How is this possible? It's raining multicolored flame? Numerous chosen from the auxiliary bloodlines were all looking on in shock and wonder. From a distance, it looked like the entire Bai clan was being bathed in fire. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun was now outside of the city, looking back in utter shock at the scene playing out. Don't blame me. I didn't do this on purpose. Scalp tingling in fear, he gritted his teeth and took advantage of the chaos in the clan to use his undying hex to head back to the North District. Even as he returned to his hut, the clan's spell formation finally couldn't last any longer, and began to teeter unstably beneath the barrage of fire. Just when it seemed like it was about to collapse, several enraged shouts could be heard from the East District as 8 shadowy figures shot up into the air. Shockingly, all of those figures emanated the fluctuations of the nascent soul stage. These were the nascent soul clan elders, who quickly split up and manned key areas of the spell formation. By bolstering the formation with all of their power, they gradually stabilized it. It was a shocking sight to Bai Xiaochun, who sat there nervously in the North District, looking at the flames outside the shield and scowling on the verge of tears. I doubt anybody realizes I'm the one who caused this. How could he have ever anticipated that trying to conjure some flame would lead to such terrifying results? Even as he stewed in his anxiety, a middle-aged man appeared in the East District. He wore luxurious clothing, and was the type of person who seemed threatening without being angry. There was something grimly impressive about him, and apparently, he was in the mid-nascent soul stage. As soon as people caught sight of him, looks of respect could be seen in their eyes, and they clasped hands and bowed. Greetings, clan chief. That man was none other than Bai Hao's father, the current clan chief of the Bai clan. Looking up into the sky beyond the spell formation shield, his expression turned icily ominous. It looked like he was just about to speak, when all of a sudden, a cold snort echoed out from a subterranean chamber in the depths of the city. It sounded ancient, and as powerful as thunder, causing the clouds above to churn. The sound of it even seemed to merge with heaven and earth, as if this person were becoming one with everything. The heavens were embodied in this person, and vice versa. Disperse. That single word caused the crimson clouds up above to shatter into countless fragments. Then, it was as if an enormous, invisible hand swept them away, clearing the sky. There in the North District, Bai Xiaochun could sense an incredibly powerful divine sense within that word, something hair-raisingly terrifying that replaced the will of the heavens. Ah diva, he thought, trembling. At the same time, he once again made sure that his own aura was well concealed. Having no foundation, the rain of firebolts gradually began to thin out. Thanks to the power of the spell formation, and the fact that the cloud had been destroyed, it disappeared, and the Bai clan was spared of any disaster. From deep within the subterranean chamber, the grim and domineering voice of the Bai clan patriarch spoke. Someone transformed 12-colored flame into a devious attack on our Bai clan. Investigate immediately, and find out who did this. Virtually everyone in the clan responded by kowtowing reverently and voicing their assent. That included Bai Qi, Madame Kai, and everyone else. As for the clan chief, although he didn't kowtow, he did clasp hands and bowed deeply, a respectful expression on his face. Upon completing his bow, he waved his sleeve and spoke out in a tone that brooked no argument. Hall of Corrections, Hall of Justice, and all other members of the clan, hear my orders. Do everything in your power to find out what happened here tonight. That night, virtually no one in the entire clan was able to rest. Under the leadership of the clan elders, as well as the Hall of Corrections and the Hall of Justice, a thorough investigation was carried out. Internal inquiries were made first, but the scope of the investigation soon led people to the ornamental rocks where Bai Xiaochun had been working. Although it was quickly determined that those rocks were the location in which the incident began, no clues had been left behind. However, the investigation only continued to intensify. Bai Xiaochun was feeling very nervous, and was aware that he had yet again caused a huge disaster. Plus, this wasn't the river-defying sect, it was the Bai clan, which had treated his own apprentice with frigid brutality. However, he still felt that he hadn't done anything wrong. It's not like I did it on purpose. What are they making such a big deal out of it for? The night passed quickly, and yet, the matter didn't end. During the following several days, people came to ask him questions on several occasions. In the end, though, no headway was made in the investigation, and eventually, the matter came to be somewhat of an unsolved mystery. Bai Xiaochun knew that it was a tense situation, and therefore, he didn't dare to attempt any more flame conjuring. However, he continued to study and analyze the topic, and kept trying to ascertain why he had failed. I can't believe it actually caused firebolts to rain down. Just what exactly did I do wrong? That fire was pretty powerful, and yet, it was only 12-colored flame. What if it had been 15-colored flame? In that case, the Bai clan might have been wiped off the map. On the one hand, he was moved by how powerful the fire had been, but on the other hand, was worried about why he had failed. As he continued to analyze the matter there in his hut, 5 days went by. By this point, he was looking a bit thin and haggard, and had already reached the limits of what he could analyze mentally. Logically speaking, I shouldn't have failed. Everything was going smoothly the entire time. The sudden failure at the end seemed really suspicious. Plus, it actually formed soul medicine. Just where exactly did I go wrong? Clenching his hands into fists, he yet again reviewed every step he had taken, and analyzed them thoroughly. Finally, sometime in the afternoon, he shivered and looked up, his eyes shining brightly. Don't tell me, it was my clone. The more he thought about it, the more likely it seemed that the problem had something to do with the fact that he had used a clone to help conjure the 12-colored flame with his true self. If it was because of my clone, then that would explain everything. I created that clone with a diva soul, and even I don't know what divine abilities might have existed in that soul. Perhaps, that really is the reason. After pondering the matter for a bit more, he left one of his clones behind and then went out into the darkness alone. Although things were tense in the clan, he was still itching to go do some more tests to see if he was right. Therefore, he raced along, leaving Bai clan territory and finding a cave deep in some mountains. There, he began preparations to make another attempt at conjuring 12-colored flame. This time, he didn't use any clone power. He relied only on himself, using the same methods as before. It was difficult, and he very nearly lost control on 2 occasions. However, by bolstering himself with spirit alcohol, he ensured that he always had enough power at his disposal. It took a bit more time as well, and soon, his head was aching with pain. By the time the sea of fire formed down into the tongue of 12-colored flame, he was soaked with sweat and panting with excitement. I didn't do anything differently than before. The only difference was that I didn't use my clone to help conjure the flame. Therefore, it definitely has something to do with my clone. My clone was made from a diva soul. It must mean that using a clone to conjure necromantic flame causes unforeseen complications. Excited to have found the reason for his previous failure, he rose to his feet, his eyes shining. In that case, I guess I've actually created my own necromantic divine ability. A magical rain of fire. I almost can't believe that I'm really this awesome. Bai Xiaochun was extremely excited, and his eyes were glowing more brightly than ever. He even felt a bit dizzy from the rush of emotion. Bai Xiaochun, actually created a new divine ability. That's the kind of thing that sect-founding patriarchs do. I can't believe I'm so worthy of admiration. He threw his head back and laughed uproariously at how amazing he was. As he reveled in his success, he thought back to how Chen Hichan had abandoned him, and realized that his loss was definitely a major blow to the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. HMMMPHH. One of these days I'm going to make sure Chen Hichan regrets that decision of his. In fact, the whole Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect is going to regret it. With that, he sat down cross-legged for a bit to recover his energy, then swaggered back to the Bai clan. Everything went very smoothly along the way. After all, he had left a clone behind in the north district of the Bai clan, and therefore, no one had even suspected that he'd left his hut. A few days later, the combined efforts of Zhou Yixing and Li Feng finally got them all of the murder soul spikes and teleportation talismans that Bai Xiaochun had requested. After studying the murder soul spikes thoroughly, Bai Xiaochun found that they were crafted from souls, using a technique he had never even realized existed. Furthermore, the souls used to create them had especially strong murderous auras. After analyzing the murder soul spikes, Bai Xiaochun realized that if he set them up in the clan right now, there would be too much of a risk of them being found. Therefore, he decided to wait until right before entering the ancestral land. That would be the best and safest bet. As he waited, he thought about the formula for 13-colored flame, and also spent time cultivating his undying live forever technique. Another half a month went by. One evening when he was sitting in meditation, working on the final chi passageways necessary to complete his undying tendons, his expression flickered, and he looked at the door. With his divine sense, he could clearly see 3 beams of light heading in his direction. Soon, 3 middle-aged men became visible, each of them wearing a black robe with a sun and a moon embroidered on it. Only members of the Hall of Corrections could wear uniforms like that, and the arrival of these men caused an instant commotion in the North District. Considering that everyone there had very low standing in the clan, they were all left trembling with fear and hesitant to make a single noise. The 3 men had arrogant expressions on their faces as they looked around in disgust at the North District. As far as they were concerned, this place was a malignant boil within the Bai clan, a dirty, filthy place that they were loath to enter. Soon, they were right outside of Bai Xiaochun's hut. Then, one of them spoke out in a coldly impatient voice. Bai Hao, get out here right now. Inside the hut, Bai Xiaochun's heart began to pound. Don't tell me they figured out it was me? Impossible. His body blurred as, instead of going out personally, he sent one of his clones out of the hut to meet the men. He kept the aura of his true self invisible. No one outside would be aware that he was still inside the hut. As the clone emerged from the hut, the 3 men from the Hall of Corrections eyed him coldly. Then the one in the lead said, "Let's go. The clan chief wants to see you." With that, they turned to leave, clearly not inclined to stay in this place one moment longer than necessary. Eyes flickering, Bai Xiaochun followed along in clone form. The clan chief wants to see me. He's Bai Hao's father. Alright, this will be a good opportunity to see what Bai Hao's father actually feels about him. Considering that he was going in clone form instead of as his true self, he felt a lot safer. The 3 men from the Hall of Corrections didn't say anything to him along the way. Their arrogance and disdain for him clearly went bone deep. Inwardly, Bai Xiaochun chuckled coldly at them, proud at how these men were like sparrows, unaware that a dragon was in their midst. Just wait until you see my real cultivation base level. Then the 3 of you will be scared to death. Bai Xiaochun was wrapped up in his thoughts as he followed them to the West District, which was very different from the East District. It was much quieter, a place that few people visited, and that was mostly occupied by female clan members. Bai Xiaochun looked around in surprise and confusion as he was led to a mansion in the corner of the district. It wasn't very large, and consisted of only a few buildings surrounding a weed-filled courtyard. It was a bleak, run-down place that didn't seem to be occupied. The 3 men stopped out front of the mansion. Go in. The clan chief is waiting inside. With that, they turned and left. Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered. He could sense a faint aura within the mansion that he was sure belonged to a cultivator in the mid-nascent soul stage. Don't tell me he's meeting me out here because he wants to kill me? Bai Xiaochun was a bit surprised, but considering that he was here in clone form, his true self would have plenty of time to get away if things went wrong. Therefore, he simply walked into the mansion. Bai Hao, he thought, your master is going into this dangerous situation for you. I want to see exactly how your father feels about you. Upon entering the main gate, he saw a man standing in the courtyard, facing away from him. Next to him was a simple well which he was looking down into. The man's hair was mostly black, but had some strands of white in it as well. Although he seemed middle-aged, he was clearly very old. Furthermore, there was something bleak and stern about him. The courtyard seemed just as bleak, and there was a pressure weighing down that made it feel like a rainstorm might break out at any moment. Bai Xiaochun looked at the man's back, and then around at the courtyard, whereupon his eyes widened in surprise. Although weeds choked the ground, they couldn't cover up the countless wooden toys that filled the area. There were little horses and soldiers, drum-shaped rattles and other knickknacks. There was a finesse to the way the toys were crafted that indicated they weren't made by a man. They seemed more like trinkets that a mother would make for her child. There were also some dilapidated items of clothing that had once belonged to a child scattered about in the corners. The scene spread out in front of Bai Xiaochun left him with some very complex and even indescribable emotions. He wasn't actually Bai Hao, but the sight of all of these children's toys made him suddenly feel as if he really had turned into him. This must be where Bai Hao grew up, he thought as he stood there looking around at the toys, wondering what Bai Hao would be feeling if he were here instead. His heart already felt as if it were heavier than before. As numerous complex emotions filled Bai Xiaochun's heart, the man standing there said, Kier told me about how you cheated in the clan trials for spirit enhancement, soul medicine and flame conjuring. His voice was cold, and didn't contain the slightest scrap of emotion. It was almost as if he were talking to a complete stranger. There was even a scolding tone to his words, the kind that would be used to reprimand a servant. Bai Xiaochun stood there silently, unsure of what to say in response. So, Bai Hao, he murmured in his heart, this is your father, huh? Bai Hao's father slowly turned, revealing a cold, expressionless face and an icy aura. The way he looked at Bai Xiaochun made it seem as if he were looking at someone he had never met. When he continued speaking, his words were as cold as a winter wind. This isn't the first time you've done something like this, either. I can tolerate your complete lack of ambition, and even the fact that you stole Kier's research notes about 15-colored flame. But now you've gone and cheated. As of this moment, Bai Xiaochun realized that before his death, Bai Hao must have revealed to his father that he was talented in flame conjuring, in the hopes of winning his approval. Sadly, Bai Hao had been completely naive in such hopes. This man would give Bai Hao no such chances. In fact, it was even possible that he knew the truth of the matter, and yet still acted this way. Not only did you humiliate me, but you also broke clan law. According to the rules, I should take away your cultivation base and have you thrown into Devil Penitentiary for 10 years. However, considering you do have the blood of the Bai clan running in your veins, I'll forgive you this one time. But if something like this ever happens again, I'll personally cleanse our clan by removing you from it. The killing intent in the clan chief's eyes was as clear as day, and his voice cut as coldly as the harshest winter gale. As a result, Bai Xiaochun felt the same bitter fright that Bai Hao would have in the same situation. The clan chief didn't seem pleased with how Bai Xiaochun was standing there silently. A flicker of loathing passed through his eyes as he gestured toward the well. This is where your mother died. She was born a servant girl, and after her death, became a servant soul. Her fate was to submit, and as a bastard son, you need to learn to do the same thing. Submit, understand? The spark of rage which rose up in Bai Xiaochun's heart was impossible to suppress. Looking over at the clan chief, he replied, no, I don't understand. The anger that burned in Bai Xiaochun's heart was fueled by his compassion and sorrow for Bai Hao. Although he had just said he didn't understand, the truth was that he understood exactly what was going on. Combined with everything else he had already learned, the situation was crystal clear. Perhaps the clan chief had not always been aware that Bai Hao was extremely talented in flame conjuring. However, after Bai Hao gave him the formula for 15-colored flame, how could he not know? He knew that Bai Hao was a talented flame conjurer, and also knew that there had been no cheating done in the trials by fire. He knew all of these things beyond the shadow of a doubt. As a mid-nascent soul stage cultivator and the clan chief, he could get information about anything he wanted in the Bai clan as easily as turning over his hand. In fact, Bai Xiaochun couldn't imagine that the man was unaware of how Bai Hao had been chased down and killed. Not only had he been aware of it, but he had turned a blind eye to what was happening. He had denied everything about Bai Hao, and even shifted all of his accomplishments over to Bai Qi. Clearly, he wanted Bai Qi to soar high, regardless of the price to be paid, even if it was the death of Bai Hao. It couldn't have been more obvious that the clan chief felt that Bai Hao was as valuable as a bug, or even less so. As for this particular meeting, its purpose was to get Bai Hao to bow his head in acquiescence, and to impress upon him that this critical juncture was not the time to make a scene. Based on the killing intent that Bai Xiaochun could see in the man's eyes, he clearly desired to see Bai Hao out of the picture for good. That was the reason why he picked this location to have this conversation, to make it very clear to Bai Hao what it meant to submit. Submit, and live. Refuse, and die. His choice to have this discussion in the location where Bai Hao's mother passed away revealed how truly malicious his intentions were. From the perspective of a bystander, Bai Xiaochun couldn't watch the scene play out without getting angry. Although it had been somewhat on a whim that he took Bai Hao as his apprentice, as of this moment, his heart was filled the same grief and bitterness that Bai Hao must have felt in life. As of this moment, he felt more serious than ever about being Bai Hao's master. Although Bai Xiaochun was the type of person who feared death, he was a righteous and loyal person in his bones. When his friends faced a deadly crisis, it didn't matter if he was trembling and weeping with fear, he would always grit his teeth and go back to their aid. Now that Bai Hao had become his apprentice, he would not turn a blind eye to the wrongs his apprentice had endured. This was the contradiction that existed within Bai Xiaochun. Within his fear of death existed a brightly burning fire of passion. The clan chief standing in front of him was completely cold and emotionless, and because of that, Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but think that Bai Hao's deep desire to please the man had been completely pointless. What did you just say? The clan chief replied, the coldness in his eyes growing more intense. He even unleashed some of the power of his cultivation base, causing wind to whip about the courtyard. Bai Xiaochun glared angrily at the clan chief and slowly said, "For better or worse, I'm your flesh and blood. Tigers don't eat their own cubs, but you, how impudent!" The clan chief roared in a voice that echoed like thunder. The killing intent in his eyes blazed as he strode toward Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun stared back at him as he approached. If the man actually attacked him, it would affect his plan to get a diva soul. And yet, Bai Xiaochun couldn't hold back from saying what he just had. Just when it seemed like the situation would devolve into a disaster, the clan chief suddenly frowned. Stopping in place, he produced a jade slip from his bag of holding. After scanning it with divine sense, his face lit with joy. Moments later, he gave Bai Xiaochun a disdainful glance, looking at him almost as if he were a corpse. Turning, he left, leaving a single sentence ringing in the courtyard behind him. "You're going to get yourself killed." Bai Xiaochun watched as the clan chief disappeared in a beam of light. Then he looked around at the courtyard, complex emotions playing in his heart and mind. Finally, he sighed. "Bai Hao. Bai Hao. If your spirit is out there, I hope you were able to see all of that." With that, he organized the tattered, crumbling clothes and rotting toys, then looked over at the well. After sending some divine sense inside, he confirmed that there was no corpse inside, so he quietly left and headed back to the North District. Beneath the Bai clan were sprawling catacombs, which was where the clan chief now stood. His hands were clasped, and he was bent over in a bow in front of a huge door. After a long moment passed, the grating voice of an old man echoed out from the door, each word seemingly capable of causing transformations in heaven and earth. "Your request from earlier is granted. Many thanks, Patriarch." The clan chief did his best to suppress the excitement he felt in his heart, and even deepened his bow. He was well aware that this patriarch was referring to more than just opening the ancestral land. He was also agreeing to give the diva soul to Bai Qi. Of course, it was impossible to open the ancestral land only for Bai Qi. Anyone in the clan who was under the nascent soul stage would be allowed to enter. Considering how big the Bai clan was, the patriarch had to give the auxiliary bloodlines an equal opportunity. However, he naturally had ways to secretly ensure that only Bai Qi got the diva soul. "You're dismissed. The event will begin in 1 month." The clan chief took a deep breath, then respectfully took his leave. Soon, word about the opening of the ancestral land began to spread through the Bai clan. All of the clan members who met the requirements to enter were very excited. That was especially true when people heard that a diva soul was in the ancestral land. All of the chosen from the auxiliary bloodlines began to grow very excited about the prospect of competing amongst each other. The opening of the ancestral land was a big matter, and the trial by fire which would take place inside was something that left the entire Bai clan shaken. It was with great fanfare that all the preparations went underway. Madame Kai was extremely pleased, and couldn't stop thinking about the wonderful prospects in store for Bai Qi. Bai Qi was equally delighted. Of course, he kept his mouth shut about certain details that only he was privy to. As for all the other chosen from the auxiliary bloodlines, he couldn't help but scoff inwardly at how eager they seemed to join in the competition. "That diva soul belongs to me." Although Bai Xiaochun had been aware that the ancestral land would be opened, he hadn't known any details. However, considering how monumental the event was, he soon learned more. "Almost a month until it opens," he thought, his eyes shining with anticipation. He was already fed up with the Bai clan, but knew he had to suppress his frustration until the time came to truly vent it. "I'm doing this for you, Bai Hao. I'm going to shock the entire clan when I get into that ancestral land." Although he felt confident that the ancestral land wouldn't be extremely dangerous, he knew that if you stole food from a tiger's mouth, you almost always ended up with an angry tiger chasing after you. When he made his move in the ancestral land, that would only be the beginning of a very dangerous situation. Therefore, he needed to be completely prepared to stay safe. The Wildlands is a huge place. I'll just have to wait and see how far the Bai clan's diva patriarch will chase me. Detonating my soul-hoarding pagoda could change the equilibrium between the Bai clan and the 2 other great clans in the area. Let's see if the diva patriarch dares to keep chasing me when he realizes that. Of course, in addition to the patriarch, there will be other members of the Bai clan to deal with, including nascent soul experts. I can't be lax. Although Bai Xiaochun was feeling nervous, he had already made up his mind. He would make his move, and then flee immediately. Besides, I refuse to believe that the Bai clan doesn't have any enemies. Eyes flickering with cold light, he went back to his cultivation. Days passed. Nobody paid much attention to him, and he didn't leave his hut. His medicinal pills were running out rapidly, and yet, one day, he made major progress with his undying tendons. It was a complete breakthrough. The instant he completed the third level of the Undying Live Forever technique, rumbling sounds filled his body, and golden light spread out, piercing through his clothing to fill the area. At the same time, he could clearly feel something like the weight of an entire mountain pressing down onto him, which was none other than the third shackle. He desperately wanted to break through that shackle, to destroy the mountainous weight crushing down on him and be transformed into something greater than before. However, he knew that he needed to wait until he formed a nascent soul before doing that. The power he would have access to at that time was the only way he would be able to break the shackle. It had been the same with the first and second levels of the Undying Live Forever technique. Shortly after making initial contact with the shackle, it was possible to make use of cultivation-based power to break it. As Bai Xiaochun sat there motionless, eyes glittering, a second shadowy figure appeared in the room. That figure was no clone, but rather, an afterimage created by the manifestation of his incredible speed. In fact, the figure remained in place for a long moment before fading away. There was no need to perform any more tests. He could tell that his speed had broken through to another level, and although he couldn't determine exactly how quickly he could move, he knew that it would be difficult for even a diva to catch him. The Undying Skin focuses on defenses. The Undying Heavenly King focuses on power. The Undying Tendons focus on explosive speed. In that case, what does the fourth level, the Undying Bones, focus on? Such thoughts filled Bai Xiaochun with deep anticipation. Too bad it's too difficult to cultivate before reaching the nascent soul stage. Plus, resources in the wildlands are severely lacking. The Undying Bones will require even more resources than the Undying Tendons. After a bit more thought, he suppressed his disappointment. Settling his chi and clearing his mind, he set about solidifying his advancement with his Undying Tendons. Meanwhile, the appointed day to open the ancestral land grew nearer and nearer. At the same time, the clan was preparing to hold a grand ceremony to offer sacrifices to their ancestors. This was a custom of the Bai clan. Such ceremonies were always held when the ancestral land was to be opened. During the ceremony, all members of the clan, no matter which bloodline they came from, would attend. Furthermore, high-ranking members of the clan would perform assessments of the clan members and give out rewards to exceptional individuals. Oftentimes, members of other clans would be invited to attend, and usually, the giant ghost king would send a representative to join the festivities. After all, it wasn't a simple matter to open the ancestral land, and it only happened once every so often. The ceremony was held the day before the opening of the ancestral land, in the central district of the Bai clan, in the ancestral shrine hall. The other two great necromancer clans sent representatives, as did the giant ghost king. The entire Bai clan bustled with activity as the final preparations were made. The shrine hall in the central district featured an enormous square, within which had been erected a huge stone gateway. The gateway was carved with the image of a middle-aged man, whose stern gaze seemed to look condescendingly upon all creation. That man was none other than the founding patriarch of the Bai clan. The shrine hall was surrounded by crowds from the Bai clan, more than 10,000 individuals. There wasn't even enough room for them on the ground, so many sat at tables which floated in the air. It was a grand sight to take in. The older members of the clan sat nearest the shrine hall, smiles on their faces as they chatted with the representatives from the other clans. Everyone was simply waiting for the ceremony to begin. Madame Kai and the other womenfolk sat in their own area, where they buzzed with conversation and made themselves quite the center of attention. Bai Qi stood out in the crowd like a star in the night sky. He sat close to the shrine hall itself, and was surrounded by important people, including some chosen necromancers from the other clans, with whom he engaged in lively banter. Of course, there were others from the auxiliary bloodlines nearby, none of whom stood out as much as Bai Qi did, but who were clearly special. One of them was the fifth young lady that Bai Xiaochun had met on his first day in the clan. She was beautiful, and despite her cold personality, was surrounded by quite a crowd of devotees. There was another young man who was about the same age as Bai Qi. He was tall and muscular, and had a booming laugh that caused everyone to take a liking to him, clan member or not. Although Bai Hao had been born a bastard, and had a very lowly position, he still had the blood of the Bai clan in him. Therefore, he was also required to attend the ceremony. He didn't get to sit near the shrine hall itself, but rather, at one of the tables floating in the air. As soon as he arrived, he noticed the fifth young lady and the burly young man. During his time in the clan, he had learned a bit about them. The fifth young lady was named Bai Yanner, and was known even in Giant Ghost City for her good looks. Quite a few young elites from the other clans had their eye on her. As for the burly young man, his name was Bai Lei, and he was a chosen from one of the auxiliary bloodlines. Although his cultivation base wasn't at the same level as Bai Chi's, he was still in late core formation. In fact, he and Bai Chi were considered to be the two rising stars of the clan. However, the two of them didn't get along very well, a fact that was well known in the clan. Together, those three were the focus of much attention in the ceremony. Were it not for the fact that it was required of him, Bai Xiaochun wouldn't have come. As he looked around at the crowds, he contemplated his plans for the ancestral land tomorrow. I should plant the murder soul spikes later today, he thought. Suddenly, he felt as if someone were looking at him. Glancing around casually, he realized that it was Madame Kai, who sat with the other womenfolk, glaring at him venomously. She managed to find me even though I'm sitting so far away, he thought, surprised. He was sitting in a very inconspicuous position, a place that should have made it difficult to lay eyes on him. And yet, Madame Kai had managed to locate him even in the crowd. Without even thinking about it, Bai Xiaochun glared back at Madame Kai with such ferocity that her eyes went wide. However, a moment later, the venom returned. Before she could do anything else, though, the sound of bells rang out. The crowd quickly went silent. At the same time, 3 beams of light appeared off in the distance. In the lead position was the clan chief, and he was flanked by 2 old men with cultivation bases in the great circle of the nascent soul stage. They were none other than the Grand Elders who ran the Hall of Corrections and the Hall of Justice. After arriving outside the shrine hall, the clan chief began to speak in a loud voice, to all members of the Bai clan who have gathered here today. All the clan members listened eagerly, but as for Bai Xiaochun, he wasn't interested at all, and simply closed his eyes. All sorts of complicated details about the ancestral land were explained, things that didn't really affect most members of the clan. Only the outstanding figures who planned to participate in the event needed to listen. Occasionally, bells would ring out, causing ripples to spread out through the cloud-filled sky and create auspicious signs. Bai Xiaochun would crack his eye open every once in a while. Feeling very much like an immortal hiding in the mundane world, he would think, I've witnessed far greater spectacles than this before. A few hours passed, and evening fell. The sacrifices to the ancestors were finished, and the bells began to ring again. Bai Xiaochun yawned and opened his eyes. Having come to the assumption that everything was over, he prepared to leave. However, it was at that point that the Grand Elder in charge of the Hall of Justice, who was sitting in front of the huge stone gate, chuckled. All right, he said. Since the clan chief insists, and no one else will back down, I guess I'll carry out the assessment this time around. The Grand Elder's chuckle was sonorous, and backed by the profundity of his cultivation base, causing illusory ripples to spread out in all directions. There was even a cloud of souls that swirled around him as he spoke. Looks of reverence could be seen in the eyes of the rest of the clan members as they looked over at him. Even the representatives from the other clans and the emissary from Giant Ghost City had very serious expressions on their faces. When Bai Xiaochun felt the old man's cultivation base fluctuations, he looked over at him with a serious expression. He was clearly half a step into the diva realm, similar to Bai Lin. Furthermore, from the soul power fluctuations coming off of him, he was obviously a necromancer. He's likely in the terrestrial rank, with profound skill in necromancy. That would explain why so many souls appeared at the mere echo of his voice. Even as Bai Xiaochun contemplated the subject, the Grand Elder continued to speak. Young heroes of the Bai clan, all of you are aware that the ultimate pinnacle of spirit enhancement is the legendary 30-fold enhancement, something which no one has ever actually accomplished. Even 20-fold spirit enhancements are virtually unheard of. Therefore, I would like to ask all of you this question. What do you think would happen to this simple feather if it received a 30-fold enhancement? Smiling, he held up a feather. It seemed completely ordinary in nature, lacking in anything which could be considered unusual. It was really just a simple feather. There is no correct answer to the question. Based on your skill in spirit enhancement, consider the question for a moment. After all, there are some things in life which can never become a reality unless you ponder them deeply first. As the Grand Elder's words echoed out, the clan members gathered by the shrine hall all looked on with thoughtful expressions. Apparently, a lot of consideration had been put into how this assessment would be carried out. There was no set answer. Rather, each response would be based on each person's varied experiences and skill sets in spirit enhancement. As such, it would be a true test of each individual's level of enlightenment. The question also touched upon matters of flame conjuring and soul medicine. Although the other two were different branches of study, one's abilities in those regards would affect one's understanding of spirit enhancement. Therefore, although the question seemed simple, it was actually extraordinarily complex. Furthermore, it was exactly as the Grand Elder had said: if one did not dare to contemplate certain matters, then it would be impossible to make them a reality. In some ways, his question actually pertained to each person's Tao. It wasn't just the ordinary members of the Bai clan who were suddenly looking very thoughtful. The clan elders and the clan chief all seemed to be pondering the question as well. Even the representatives from the other two clans and the emissary from Giant Ghost City were all sitting there in quiet contemplation. Furthermore, from the nature of the question, it was possible to see that the Grand Elder from the Hall of Justice had extremely profound skill in spirit enhancement. No one responded to the question. The area outside the stone gate was completely silent, to the point where it would have been possible to hear a pin drop. Everyone was considering the assessment question. This type of assessment was a custom during the ceremony of ancestral sacrifice in the Bai clan. Theoretically speaking, the question was addressed to everyone, but the reality was that only a few people would actually speak up and answer it. Usually, the chosen from any given bloodline would represent that bloodline to speak out and answer. As could be imagined, the competition between the various bloodlines in this matter was fierce. Of course, the elders of the clan were aware of that, and actually encouraged the competition. As long as such competition was kept under control, it was a way to ensure that the blood of the clan pumped strong and hard in the veins of the clan members. Bai Xiaochun rolled his eyes. To others, this question would be a difficult one to answer, especially because there was no way to prove whether one was right or wrong. But to Bai Xiaochun, it was far too simple. After all, in the trial by fire in the labyrinth, he had personally performed spirit enhancements well beyond the 20-fold level. Although he hadn't reached the 30th level, he had seen the clues pointing to the outcome. Clearing his throat, he thought, if I answer this question, it really would be cheating. Although he was itching to give a response and see what happened, he believed himself to be a straightforward and upright person. Furthermore, despite the fact that he could cheat if necessary, in this case, it wouldn't be very helpful, and in fact, could cause more suspicion to be cast on him. With such thoughts on his mind, he yawned and pretended that he wasn't even listening. After a long moment, the Grand Elder from the Hall of Justice looked around at the gathered members of the clan, smiled, and said, "Who would like to answer first?" After a long moment of silence, one of the young men seated next to Bai Qi, who was also a member of the direct bloodline, rose to his feet with glittering eyes. "Senior, I am Bai Li, and I wish to answer the question." Instantly, all of the other clan members present looked over. When they identified who it was that had spoken, it was possible to see expressions of scorn, jealousy, coldness, and other various emotions. As for the clan elders, some seemed bored, whereas others were nodding in encouragement. The clan chief gave a slight nod. Bai Xiaochun looked at the young man out of the corner of his eye, curious as to what he would say. Bai Li was very excited to be the center of so much attention, and was already glad he had spoken up first. At the least, he would garner a bit more attention from the senior generation. Clearing his throat and putting a very solemn expression onto his face, he said, "Senior, based on my understanding, if you perform a 30-fold spirit enhancement on that feather, it will most likely transform into a precious treasure." In fact, to call it a precious treasure would probably be an understatement. With that, the young man looked nervously at the Grand Elder from the Hall of Justice. However, before the Grand Elder could even say anything, ripples of laughter spread out through the audience. Many shaking heads could be seen, as well as chuckles of scorn. What a load of garbage. Even a complete moron could guess that an ordinary object that receives a 30-fold spirit enhancement would become a precious treasure. A strange expression could be seen on Bai Xiaochun's face as he looked at Bai Li. As for Bai Li, he could hear what people around him were saying, and the laughter, and immediately, his face turned scarlet. "It was a brave thing to speak first," said the Grand Elder, smiling. Instead of offering an assessment, he looked around and said, "Would anyone else like to give an answer?" Bai Li sat down, looking extremely embarrassed. However, despite the fact that his answer had mostly been a cheap trick, his goal had been to get some attention, and from what he could tell, it had worked. When he thought about that, his mood perked up, and he even felt quite pleased. Because Bai Li had dared to speak up, more of the clan members in the audience began to do the same. "Grand Elder, I think that after performing a 30-fold spirit enhancement on the feather, it would become enormous. It would probably be big enough to blot out the sun and the moon." "Grand Elder, my bet is that the feather would transform into a fan. A feathered fan that could rock heaven and earth." "Grand Elder, in my judgment, if that fan got a 30-fold enhancement, it would probably become a feather sword that could dominate everything." "Not necessarily. Grand Elder, I think that the feathered fan would become a sealing mark that you could use to grow wings. Answers and explanations of all sorts filled the air. The clan elders smiled and listened, nodding occasionally, but mostly just sitting there quietly. As for the Grand Elder from the Hall of Justice, his expression was the same as ever the entire time. He seemed to be pondering all of the answers given, but not taking any of them too seriously. Bai Xiaochun, on the other hand, had to hold back from jumping in to correct people. Considering how amazing he was, this was an amazing opportunity to show off, which was one of his favorite pastimes. However, he suppressed that urge with every answer that he heard. I have to just bite my tongue, he told himself. There's no point in jumping into the conversation. No point at all. Eventually, one of the two rising stars of the clan, Bai Lei, shot to his feet. Immediately, everyone went quiet, and all gazes came to be fixed upon him. Even Bai Qi looked over, his eyes narrowed. The representatives from the other two clans and the emissary from Giant Ghost City were all aware of Bai Lei's reputation in the clan, and were also very interested to see what he would say. Grand Elder, Jr. isn't very skilled at spirit enhancement. Based on what I know, it's hard for me to guess what a 30-fold spirit-enhanced feather would become. However, I can well imagine that after the 30th enhancement, the feather might become some sort of spirit. There are flame spirits and wood spirits in the world, so perhaps there are also feather spirits. Bai Lei's words caused many in the audience to look either shocked or moved. The elders' eyes glittered, and many smiles could be seen on their faces. As for the Grand Elder from the Hall of Justice, he actually nodded for the first time. That nod provoked quite a response from the various members of the Bai clan, and discussions immediately broke out in the crowd. Bai Xiaochun looked over at Bai Lei curiously. Although the feather spirit answer wasn't completely correct, it was actually more in line with the truth than any of the other answers so far. As the audience talked about what Bai Lei had just said, a few more clan members spoke up to give answers of their own. However, none of them could compare to Bai Lei's, and many were obviously just variations of what he had said. The clan elders were all shrewd people, and realized this instantly. Eventually, the fifth young lady rose, bowed, and then gave a simple answer that attracted a lot of attention. Grand Elder, I think that it would become a rainbow. I know that feathers and rainbows aren't necessarily related to each other, but I still think that a rainbow is the answer. As she sat back down, the Grand Elder nodded, and for the first time, provided some feedback. Anything and everything is possible. Not a bad answer. At this point, the Grand Elder's eyes came to rest on Bai Qi. Clearly, he was curious what the number one chosen in the Bai clan would say as his answer. Actually, he wasn't the only one looking at Bai Qi. The other clan elders, as well as many other ordinary clan members, were all waiting for his answer. Considering how many other people had spoken up so far, it was definitely time for him to speak. Seeing how so many eyes had come to rest on him, Bai Qi smiled faintly and then rose to his feet. After bowing to the Grand Elder from the Hall of Justice, he looked up, eyes sparkling with the utmost self-confidence. A proud gleam could be seen in Madame Kai's eyes, and anticipation was even visible in the clan chief's expression. From the soft look in the clan chief's eyes, it was obvious that he viewed Bai Qi differently than the others. Fifth junior sis and junior brother Lei both provided part of the answer. Perhaps it was a bit misleading for me to wait so long to give my answer, I hope you can all forgive me. Spirit enhancement is one of the foundations of cultivation in the wildlands, and can manifest countless variations. After a 20-fold enhancement, it would indeed be possible for the feather to become a rainbow or a feather spirit. However, there is more to a 30-fold enhancement than that. Bai Qi appeared to be in extremely high spirits, and seemed thoroughly captivating as he stood there, single-handedly surpassing all of the other clan members in his generation. It is impossible to say for sure what will happen after a 30-fold enhancement. However, I am 80% sure that the feather will become a true, living bird, a phoenix that could dance in the highest heavens, the foremost among all birds in the world. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.